do what it takes to upskill those researchers to make sure that the projects they're funding are genuinely equitable and good value for money, really. Because if your research is only looking at half the population, that's not good value for money. It's not good quality research. So that, again, I think is another real positive that we're seeing in terms of, just another different way of tackling the problems. But, I do think it needs a lot of probably a lot more government investment in terms of the public funded research. Just for other funders, charitable and private funders, to really think about the fact that women's health is not niche. Like, it is, we're not a minority group, and this stuff needs funding, and it could just unlock so many kind of medical mysteries.
I'm Shreya Parekh, and you're listening to Empower Her, the podcast for busy women aged 35 and beyond. If you're feeling stuck and unfulfilled with your health and wealth, get ready to be empowered to take action. My guests and I will be providing you with knowledge, resources, and ideas to help you broaden your perspectives, learn more about yourself, and define your path to live your absolute best life. Be sure to hit that follow button to stay tuned with Empower Her, and check out the valuable free resources available on the website to support your journey. Are you tired of feeling unheard in the healthcare system? Many women experience the gender health gap, where their health concerns are dismissed, underdiagnosed, or under-researched, leading to poorer health outcomes. Join me for an empowering conversation with award-winning health journalist Sarah Graham, author of Rebel Bodies, A Guide to the Gender Health Gap Revolution. We'll discuss the realities of the gender health gap, strategies for effective self-advocacy, and ways to support progress for women's health. Together, let's bridge this gap and create a healthcare system that truly listens to all women. Sarah, welcome to the Empower Her podcast. It's great to have you on. I'm really excited to delve into this topic because the topic that we're going to talk about is the reason why I kind of started this podcast. It's really for women to understand the issues around the gender inequalities that we face, and there are so many, and it's something I didn't realise the detail of it, and I'm really glad to have you on. Sarah, could you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your journey from where you are to what you're doing now? That would be great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So yes, I'm a freelance health journalist and the author of Rebel Bodies. And I've been writing about women's health for about the last 10 years in sort of various different guises. I started out writing more about mental health, and then I moved into writing more about sexual and reproductive health. And as I kind of progressed through my career writing about more and more different topics, I have really become very interested in the sort of wider, sense of women's health. We don't just have gynae parts and boobs. There is a lot more kind of going on. And I, about 6 years ago, became really interested in gender health inequalities, the gender health gap. Because as you say, once you realize that it's an issue, you see it everywhere. And I was finding, that I could be talking to people about chronic illnesses. I could be doing interviews about endometriosis or the menopause, or, even something like ME/CFS or fibromyalgia. And a lot of what I was hearing was very similar. And the key thing really that got me very angry and very frustrated at first was this really overwhelming feeling, actually, that women were not being taken seriously by healthcare professionals, were not being listened to, were being dismissed and told that their symptoms were all in their head, or that it wasn't a big deal, or it was normal. And so that really was what led on ultimately to the book. I initially started a blog called Hysterical Women, which explored some of these stories, and really actually was a place to prove to women that they weren't on their own, because that was something that so many women said was, I feel like it's just me, I feel so isolated, I felt like it was just that I was weaker than everyone else and I wasn't coping as well as I should be. And so I wanted to kind of prove the point that actually that's not the case. This is happening to so many women, and that there are so many different factors involved. So, race and gender identity and sexuality and disabilities all kind of factor into this, and make it harder to get the healthcare that you deserve. So yeah, as I say, with Rebel Bodies, it was really about putting those stories into more context, exploring kind of from healthcare professionals' point of view why this happens, and also really wanting to celebrate as well some of the activism, some of the advocacy that I was seeing happening in this space. So that hopefully it's not a totally depressing read, but there's some stuff in there that's inspiring as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great actually, because we don't often hear about, we hear the bad stuff, but we don't hear about the good stuff, which we do because it helps us to really kind of understand that things are happening and things are changing, that it's a slow process. But I think great things are happening and there's great people doing great things, which I'm glad you have highlighted, because a lot of books I read are quite depressing and and it kind of makes me feel like, oh, okay, now what?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't bits in the book that are enraging and depressing, and that make people feel angry and frustrated about the situation, but equally I wanted to say that actually, compared to where we were 10 years ago when I was first writing about this, the conversation has changed enormously. And I think so much of that is down to patient power and advocacy and people speaking out. Things like this podcast actually are such an important part of shifting the dial, in terms of that conversation. And that is what then drives social change, political change, that is so desperately needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you just explain a little bit about what the gender health gap is, because not everyone is aware of it, and I guess to the detail they may make some assumptions about it, and what kind of things are being done to reduce the gender health gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So the gender health gap in a nutshell is a way of referring to the gender disparities in the healthcare treatment and outcomes between men and women. So we know things like women are kept waiting longer in A&E than men. They may be less likely to be prescribed painkillers in A&E, more likely to be prescribed things like sedatives, anti-anxiety medication. And we know that across lots of different areas of healthcare, the issues that mostly affect women, or that affect women in different ways from men, are neglected. So they've been under-researched, they've been under-prioritized. Things like gynecology are typically the sort of Cinderella services of the NHS, which means that, in times of crisis, like the crisis we have now and have had for the last few years, actually the gynecology waiting lists grow by more than any other medical specialty, and that is a real problem. So there are lots of different factors, and I talk in the book about 3 sort of gaps that make up the gender health gap. The first of which is a knowledge gap. So we just know less about women's bodies. Women have not been included in medical research historically and clinical trials. And so there have been a lot of assumptions that you could just do all of the research on male bodies, typically white male bodies as well. And then you could just kind of extrapolate the results and it would kind of more or less be the same for women. And that isn't necessarily always the case. And then, as I mentioned, conditions like endometriosis, conditions like fibromyalgia, even things like migraine, where women are disproportionately affected, there has been less research into these issues than the ones that we think of as kind of gender neutral, or even the ones that particularly affect men. So that's an issue. It means that doctors are at a disadvantage when it comes to diagnosing some of these conditions, and it really kind of very closely interconnects with the second gap, which is the trust gap. And this, we see this in all kind of walks of life, don't we, within our kind of the patriarchal society that we live in, that women are just not trusted. We see it. I think one of the really kind of clear examples is when we talk about rape cases, and women being disbelieved or being told, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. And I think that kind of underlying feeling that women are not reliable witnesses to our own experiences, to our own suffering, is something that we do see in healthcare as well. And I think that's where a lot of those feelings of being dismissed and not taken seriously comes from. Because if as a doctor, you're presented with a patient who has a lot of symptoms that you don't understand and you can't connect the dots because it's a condition that you haven't been taught about in medical school, and there is a lot of ego involved in medicine, as we know, it's actually a lot easier to just go, oh, well, you must be making it up, or, it must be all in your head, it must be psychosomatic. And I'm not going to investigate further. I'm just going to kind of fob you off.
Yeah.
That isn't to say that all doctors are doing that, but I think there is a really kind of recurring theme of this happening. And I think a lot of that does come from these stereotypes that we still have about women, that we're hysterical, that we're overly emotional, that we're irrational. And then the third gap that I talk about is more to do with resources. So as I mentioned, the services for women are not prioritized. We know that sexual health services have been hit hugely in recent years. We know that the gynecology waiting times increased by more than any other specialty during the pandemic. And currently there are only 600,000 women waiting to see a gynecologist just in England. So that is a huge issue. And, when you look at maternity services as well, we have this huge staffing crisis where there are just not enough staff, not enough resources to ensure that patients are getting safe care. And there's just this kind of idea that women will just get on with it. And so that, again, really kind of feeds into these poorer outcomes that women receive.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely relate to some of those scenarios, and especially with maternity care. It's kind of let's get you in and out very, very quickly, and then you're kind of left to your own devices. There is some care. I'm not going to completely dismiss it in the sense that there is a level of care involved. But there are far too many cases of women going through that process and coming out not in a great way at all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really scary how,
yeah.
Something like 1 in 3 births are traumatic, and that is just so unacceptable in this day and age.
Yeah.
A huge part of that comes from women not feeling listened to, women not feeling that their choices are respected, that they're not believed when they say that they need pain relief. And it's just not good enough.
Yeah. There is that lack of I feel that it boils down to respect as well. It's that lack of respect when a woman goes to the GP or goes to see the consultant, whatever that might be, and it's just that level of feeling of you're not respected, you're kind of beneath that person that you're being dealt with. I can't explain the feeling. I'm trying to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know exactly what you mean. So there's this quote that I see sometimes that certain doctors use, which is, don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree. And I think it is that, as you say, that complete lack of acknowledgement that, yes, they've got the textbook expertise. Yes, they've done a decade's worth of training to be a GP. And that's really important. But actually, you as the patient have your own expertise. No one knows your body better than you do. And actually, that expertise that you bring to the table should be complementary to what your doctor has. And I think so often there is that kind of really unbalanced power dynamic of doctor knows best, and you just have to, go in and do what you're told.
Yeah.
When really, it should be a partnership. It should be a kind of collaboration to try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah. you're right. You go in and it's almost like, you're at school, do as you're told, and this is what take this, and that's fine. There's no feeling of actually I should question this, or maybe suggest something, or explain further. It's kind of go in. This is how I'm feeling. Here you go. Take this.
Yeah.
Off you go.
And I
And
think a lot of women in particular feel that we're not entitled to question things, feel
yes,
that we have to just do as we're told and, be a good girl and all of
yeah,
that. And one of the things that I say to people a lot is, you are entitled to, ask your doctor to justify their decision, ask why they don't want to refer you for a certain test, or why they think it's this instead of that, or even if you're not satisfied at the end of the appointment, to go out and ask the receptionist if you can see someone else for a second opinion. And all of that is easier said than done, of course. Like, it's really difficult when you're in the situation. I know
yeah,
myself, because of that power dynamic, you do sort of feel very like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. You just kind of go along with it. But I hope that, by reading the book, women will take away some of the kind of tips, some of the advice that I've picked up over the years, both from patients and from healthcare professionals, about kind of ways of navigating the system in a way that hopefully makes that a tiny bit easier.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely advocate for women to really do their research and learn from, reading your book. And there's lots of other things out there. There's lots of other resources out there as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is being done, the positive stuff, to reduce this health gap?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the conversation around the menopause is a really classic, like
Yeah,
perfect example of, 10 years ago, almost to the day, I was first commissioned to write an article about the menopause, and nobody was talking about the menopause. And looking back at that now, I just think it's absolutely mind blowing that the menopause is like front page news almost. Like, it's everyone's talking about it. Davina McCall's doing Channel 4 documentaries about it. There are debates in Parliament. We've seen things like the introduction of the HRT prepayment certificates. And obviously, there's still a really long way to go. But I think the fact that we've had these really big and influential patient-led campaigns, so things like the Make Menopause Matter campaign, things like the menopause mandate, are really kind of shifting the dial on that. And we can see it to some extent as well in the menstrual health space. There are lots and lots, particularly like really young women actually, who are talking about period issues, who are getting involved in, whether it's providing menstrual products to schools, or going in and doing educational workshops about what's normal, what's not normal. I think that we've seen a really amazing movement actually of, and it is, by and large, it's women supporting women and saying, this is what I've learned, let me share it with you, let me support you, and let me help you. I think the fact that 2 years ago the government published the first ever women's health strategy for England is really significant. Um, I don't think it's been implemented as most of us would have liked it to be. I
yeah,
think there's still a lot of work to be done there. But I think the fact of its existence is a really important testament to that patient power, because 10 years ago, politicians weren't even thinking about this. It was not on their radar. And it's down to patients speaking out and saying, this isn't good enough. We deserve better. We want better, that it is on the political agenda now. And for me, it's really important that we keep up that momentum and that we extend it to other areas of healthcare where women are, continuing to be neglected and ignored and forgotten about.
yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about the gaps that are out there that women might not be aware of, the not so obvious gaps, if you can have any off the top of your head?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I mean, I think, we do, typically when we're talking about the gender health gap, we think about what's kind of referred to as bikini medicine. So we think about breast cancer, we think about gynae stuff, we think about hormones, but we don't necessarily think about things like, the impact that menopause has on our cardiovascular health. We don't think about the fact that, women with Alzheimer's outnumber men 2 to 1. We don't think about the fact that, a lot of chronic illnesses, things like migraine, things like fibromyalgia, I've already mentioned, ME/CFS, long COVID, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, all of these disproportionately affect women. And we don't really, the science just hasn't really been done to fully understand why that is. Are there kind of hormonal mechanisms involved in some of this? We know that conditions like epilepsy and asthma, for example, can be influenced by the menstrual cycle. So a lot of women will get premenstrual exacerbation of symptoms of their various conditions. So there are lots of kind of areas across the whole body where, that there might be a hormonal connection, but we just don't really think about it as a kind of women's health issue.
Yeah. I think it not just with that. It's also to do with the hospital care and like that kind of thing. So when you go and see the consultants, do you think there are gaps there with experiences that men and women face, the differences there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know certainly as far as the gender pain gap goes, there's been a lot of research looking at kind of treatment in A&E. So as I mentioned at the beginning, that women are typically left waiting longer, then less likely to be given painkillers. And, certainly I've spoken to women who've talked about being in hospital with, absolutely agonizing conditions. One woman said that she had an ovarian cyst that had ruptured, and she was absolutely in agony in A&E waiting to be seen. Basically just, ignored, left waiting in a corridor, which, sadly is also a testament to the state that the NHS is in. But she said there was a guy on the trolley next to her with gallstones who just kept being given morphine. He was, and it's not to say that his pain was less valid than her and he didn't deserve the morphine, but she was in so much pain and she was not getting any pain relief. Whereas she could see that this guy was, also in a lot of pain, but that pain was being taken seriously, was being treated. He was being given, hardcore heavy duty painkillers to try and tackle that. So yeah, I definitely think we know that there are disparities there as well.
Did she question why she wasn't given the treatment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know kind of the details of how that conversation went down, but yeah, I think it was a real kind of struggle for her to get the pain relief that she needed.
Yeah, I think more. I feel like women need to. It's that questioning, having the confidence to question, ask, and say, I don't want to. What are my options? What are my alternatives? It can't be just this one thing. Or I want to be examined further. I want to be referred. And it's feeling empowered to make those decisions. Can you? I mean, I don't know whether there's no what's the word, like right or wrong in the sense that do this and do this and do this. But have you got any advice for women just generally? What they can do like right now to take care of their health if they think that something is wrong. What can they do?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of tips in the book, and one of the things that I did was at the end of each chapter, I've included specific kind of advice and resources related to the subject of that chapter. So, there's a chapter on menstrual health, and all of the resources at the end of that chapter are specifically around period issues. But like general things, I mean, being prepared, as you've already mentioned, doing your research, having some kind of idea of what you think it might be. Just, even if it's just saying to the doctor, could it be this? And can you explain why you think it's not? Or, is it worth doing such and such test? Or can you refer me to so and so? Things like that can be really useful. The other thing I say a lot is, particularly with GP appointments where you've only got 10 minutes, it's not a lot of time. I've never met a single GP who thinks it's enough time. They all say we would like longer, we need longer to get to the bottom of, anything that's kind of even remotely complex. So try and make the most of that time. And I often say to women, write down everything that you want to say, so that you're not gonna, your mind isn't going to go blank under pressure, as so often happens to so many of us. Things like tracking your symptoms, how long it's been going on for, the impact it's having on your life, so that doctors have a really kind of clear, almost sort of visual diary of what's going on. That can be really useful in terms of just giving them a clear understanding of what's happening. I do often recommend to take somebody with you, particularly if you're feeling nervous or anxious about not being listened to or respected, just because, it might be that you take someone with you and they can actually advocate on your behalf, but equally, it might just be that having that moral support gives you a bit more confidence. It might be that it changes the whole dynamic of the conversation. One woman I interviewed said that she'd experimented with taking her male partner to appointments with her. And she said he would literally just sit there, stare at his shoes for the entire 10 minutes. But the way she was spoken to with him sat next to her was completely different, much more respectful. She felt she was taken much more seriously just because there was a man sat next to her. And that's quite a depressing thing to have to say to people. But I do think it can help, for it, just in terms of shifting that power dynamic, I think, a little bit. Some doctors really don't like it, but it's your right. You're entitled to take somebody with you if that's what you want to do. So that can be really helpful. And again, as I've mentioned, if you're not convinced by what the doctor's saying, and you feel able to and safe to challenge them or to ask for a second opinion. The other thing that I often say is to use what's known as the ICE model. So that is ideas, concerns, and expectations, is quite a useful way of thinking about what you actually want to get out of the appointment. So ideas is, what do you think might be going on here? What are your concerns? So how is it affecting you? Are you worried that it might be cancer? Are you worried, that it's impacting on your work life? Or, and then expectations is, what do you actually want to get out of the appointment? So it might be saying to your doctor, I'd like to be referred to this specialist, or I would like you to prescribe such and such. It might not even be anything as concrete as that. It might just be, I want you to investigate this, or to tell me what you think's going on, or just to kind of believe me and validate that's what, that something is wrong. But yeah, so that can be a kind of useful way of kind of thinking about what you want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the other thing, I think, if you feel like you need more time, you can always request a double appointment, because I've been in a situation where I've gone to the doctor and I've said, oh, I've got this, this, and this, and I've been told, no, I can only go through one thing because it's for one appointment, one thing. And if you want to discuss more things, it's more appointments. And I've just been like, oh, but I've just saved like all one occasion, and now I have to like
you kind of save them all up, don't you?
Yeah, now I have to book all these separate appointments for each separate thing. So yeah, I know it's very difficult to get an appointment sometimes, as it is, especially a double appointment, but if you can try and make that clear at the beginning, if you need that extra time, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it is just a case of kind of prioritizing what is most urgent and just thinking, what, I'll deal with that later. But do what you can to work within a system that we all know is really, really struggling.
Yeah, definitely. So, we know that there's a gender health gap, it exists. What can women do? And well, not just women, what can everyone do to help reduce that gap, for others as well? How can we all work together to help reduce that gap?
What can people do to help reduce the gender health gap? Well, I don't know when this is going out, but if it's before next Friday, no, before next Thursday, people can vote in the general election. I think it is really important that we remember that these issues are political, and they're influenced by political choices. So that is something that people can do. Beyond that, writing to your MP, getting involved in campaigns that are already out there. So if you're particularly interested in the menopause, for example, sign the Make Menopause Matter petition, get involved with the campaigning that is already being done in that space. Equally, if there are other areas that you're interested in, go and see what's already happening out there. If there isn't anything already happening, do it yourself. Start a campaign or start a support group on Instagram or Facebook or wherever you're kind of using for social media. I think that is something that seems quite small, but actually that can have a huge impact on other people who are feeling isolated and alone. And just keep talking about it. Really, talk to your daughters, your mum, your sisters, your friends. Just bring these conversations out into the open, and keep up that momentum, keep that conversation going. Is a really important thing we can do. If you have a bad experience yourself, speak out about it. Whether that is just on social media or whether it's speaking to journalists like me who are trying to raise awareness more widely about what's going on. Because I think the more people know about it, the more we keep talking about it, the more pressure there will be for political change, for healthcare professionals to engage with these issues, for medical schools to rethink the way that they're working and the way that they're training people. It is about that kind of whole societal wide shift, and we have to kind of attack it on lots of different fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. I I want to ask you a quick question about research. So obviously, we need more research on women's bodies, and I feel like why isn't that happening? Like, what is the blocker, if there is one? Have you got an answer for that? And how can we really get in there and push for this research? And I know you said a lot of this stuff is political, so there's that aspect of getting involved, but surely the universities and all these, research institutions out there should be thinking, no, we need to start researching
Yeah,
women's bodies.
absolutely. I think there are two kind of interlinking factors there, one of which is interest. So we know historically researchers, medical scientists have been men, and more and more that is shifting. We've got a lot more women going into medicine and going into medical research than we did 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. So I think the amount of interest in women's health is definitely shifting, whereas in previous generations it just wasn't. It's not even that it wasn't a priority, it just wasn't even considered. Like, nobody was thinking about these issues. I think the other issue that I know is facing researchers who are trying to do more in this space is funding. And as we know, funding is always an issue for pretty much everything. But one of the people that I interviewed for the book was a professor doing research into polycystic ovary syndrome. And he said that he had a colleague who, when she is applying for research funding, will apply for it on the theme of metabolic disorders rather than PCOS, because PCOS doesn't get funded, but metabolic disorders do. And so she was having to kind of use that loophole to research PCOS, by kind of making it seem less like a niche women's thing, which is how these issues are still kind of seen. And I think that is a really big issue. A lot of researchers that I speak to talk about difficulties getting the grants, getting the funding that they actually want in order to do the research that needs to be done. There's a really interesting and important project going on at the moment at Imperial College London, called the Message Project, which stands for, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's something, it's to do with essentially equity in sex and gender in medical research. So what they have done is they've worked with funders, so both kind of public funders, but also, and charity funders, but also kind of private equity funders. They've worked with medical journals. They've worked with researchers themselves to co-produce a set of guidance, basically, where researchers will be required, if they want their funding application and to be, what's the word, competitive, they will be required to show that they are including women, that they're accounting for sex and gender in their medical research, and that's across the board with all medical research. So that, I think, is hugely important. We have, in the UK, there is no guidance on that. So, whereas we know in the US there is much more of a kind of onus on researchers to show that they're including women. There's been that in place since 1993. We don't have anything like that in the UK currently, which is really shocking. And so, the fact that they've worked with funders, they've worked with journals like the BMJ, they've also worked with regulators to essentially make it really difficult for researchers to kind of wriggle out of it. So essentially what they're saying is, if you don't follow these guidelines to show that you are being inclusive of sex and gender, it'll be harder for you to get funding. It'll be harder for you to get published in medical journals. It'll be harder for your drugs to be approved by regulators if the clinical trials haven't been inclusive. And so that's something that's being worked on at the moment, which I think is really exciting, is really important, and hopefully will kind of start to, push things a bit more in the right direction. And I've been speaking a lot to the kind of co-lead on that project, who says that actually what's really promising is that all of those kind of stakeholders that they're working with recognize the importance of this and are prepared to, do what it takes to upskill those researchers to make sure that the projects they're funding are genuinely equitable and good value for money, really. Because if your research is only looking at half the population, that's not good value for money. It's not good quality research. So that, again, I think is another real positive that we're seeing in terms of, just another different way of tackling the problems. But, I do think it needs a lot of, probably a lot more government investment in terms of the public funded research. And just for other funders, charitable and private funders, to really think about the fact that women's health is not niche. It is, we're not a minority group. And this stuff needs funding, and it could just unlock so many kind of medical mysteries.
And save the NHS a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the long term, I think, it's a huge way of saving a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many of the issues that we're talking about, there is a huge false economy in not investing in this. So there was some research published by the McKinsey Health Institute and the World Economic Forum earlier this year, which looked at the economic benefits of closing the gender health gap by 2040. And globally, it was $1 trillion could be saved to the by the global economy. I think in the UK it was something like £39 billion. which is huge, you know? And I think there is a real kind of short-term mindset of, oh, we don't have the money to spend, we don't have the money to spend. But actually, if you invest it now, the amount that you save in the long term is enormous.
Mm. I sometimes feel like, I don't want to kind of go into like theories and things, but I sometimes feel like um, a lot of things aren't looked into in detail because there's a money making thing going on in the background, if that makes sense. You know,
Yeah,
it,
absolutely.
it and you almost, I sometimes think that, because there's someone out there making money off not providing certain things because it's, um, a bit like the kind of pharmaceutical industry or something like that. You're you're not putting the money into research because they may no longer make the amount of money they need to make to sustain their business.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because I think there is definitely a kind of commercial
Yeah,
imperative. And I think, one of the things that we've seen, again, kind of coming back to the menopause, which I've written about a lot, is how, as conversations around the menopause have grown and awareness has grown, we have seen a huge number of brands and
yeah, God,
individuals cashing in on that,
yeah,
and the menopause market now is huge,
yeah,
absolutely huge. Um, and some of that stuff is good and valuable and
yeah,
innovative, and some of it is absolute snake oil. Like
yeah,
you could waste so much money trying to find solutions. And I think that what the government, the healthcare system in particular, needs to wake up to is that they are storing up problems for themselves by allowing this to happen. One of the things that I am really concerned about is how much the wellness industry and, some of these other brands are really profiting from the fact that women aren't getting the support they need from the healthcare system. And
yeah,
that's really worrying. I speak to Diane Danzibrink about the fact that there are women in her support groups who are spending their life savings on private healthcare, on things they've seen online, on you know all sorts, because they're desperate, because they can't get the help they need from their GP. And I just think we have to be aware of that, and we have to not be kind of like sniffy and snobby about the fact that women are choosing to do this. We have to recognize the reasons why they're doing it,
yeah,
and that actually we should be investing in evidence-based solutions
mhm,
so that women don't feel so desperate that they are pouring money into things that are
yeah,
promising the world and delivering not a lot.
yeah, absolutely. It's an emotional, the marketing targets the vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're in that vulnerable situation, you're desperate for a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And when that marketing campaign comes along and you think, maybe let me just try that, it might work. Or, that
Yeah.
anything will do. And I have a really big bugbear about menopause chocolate. Just
Oh my goodness.
I just thought when I saw that in the retail shop that I saw it in, I just thought, really, is this what we're going down? Like,
Yeah,
I thought, what
absolutely.
is in this chocolate that, miraculously helps my
Yeah,
menopause?
yeah. I mean, I think, it's interesting. In some areas, I think we are seeing a bit of a shift. So, one of the things that I know in sort of pelvic floor circles, for lack of
Yeah,
a word, people talking about incontinence and pelvic prolapse and all of these kinds of issues. One of the real bugbears for those advocates for a long, long time has been the marketing for things like incontinence pads, and this idea that you just use an incontinence pad for the rest of your life rather than
yeah,
actually fixing the underlying problem. And from speaking to some women in that space, I was having this conversation a couple of weekends ago. I think we are actually seeing a bit of a shift where those brands are going, okay, actually maybe we do need to be engaging with, you know use these pads in the short term, but in the longer term, here are some of the things that you can do to try and improve your pelvic floor health. And so, I think, again, a lot of that is by patient advocates saying, no, this isn't a long-term solution. If you want to be supporting women with these issues, you need to be, showing them the ways to solve the problem as well.
Yeah, these a lot of these even things like paracetamol, ibuprofen, they all have their place. Obviously, we need to if we're in pain, we certainly need to take something to take us through that day. But the key thing here is to really think, I should not be in this pain. There's something going on that needs to be sorted out, whatever that thing is, and rather than just masking it with whatever it is you're masking it with, whether that's the pads or the medication or herbs, whatever you use. Like there's lots of the chocolate, whatever.
Yeah.
there's you need to really advocate and go for it and ask to be checked out properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Sarah, I'm a really big advocate for collaboration. I just think that's the way forward. What collaboration opportunities are you looking for right now, personally or professionally?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel the same. And I think, sisterhood is such an important part of how we fix this problem. I'm always interested in hearing from anyone working in this space. As I say, I cover such a kind of wide range of issues affecting women, affecting their health. So I'm always keen to hear from new campaigns that are perhaps looking for media coverage. I'm always interested in hearing from women that want to share their story of a particular condition or the way they've been treated. And equally, I am always interested in hearing from brands that are doing things genuinely innovative, genuinely improving the lives of patients. Same with research. As I've said, we have to be working on this across all different fronts. So if there are researchers who want to talk about things that they're doing, I'd love to hear from them. I'm open to all sorts.
That's fantastic. Sarah, thank you so much for being on the Empower podcast. And I just want to let the audience know, if you want to find out some more information and just get an overview, please do have a read of the book, Rebel Bodies. All the details are in the show notes. But Sarah, thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Empower Her. I hope today's episode has left you feeling inspired and motivated to make a positive difference in your world. Please follow the podcast and share it with anyone who will find it helpful. Until next time, keep striving for positive change and greatness for all women.